Industrial organizational psychology is this branch of psychology that deals with how can we motivate people to, be more productive at work, have higher job satisfaction at work, basically just people science in the workplace. And so when you start to so the employee experience has a lot of different pieces to it, from onboarding to skill development to, in some cases, offboarding or even having alumni programs. Where I fall is more along the internal development of a person. So I was recently working with a healthcare company, a company within the healthcare field, who was looking on making an impact to getting a higher more people to fill the pipeline into difficult to fill positions. So if you take some of these frontline workers who are really motivated, but they may not have come from the background or the means to be able to.
Okay, it says recording started. So, joining me today is Krystina Moustakis.
Moustakis.
Moustakis. Oh no, I'm sorry, I say it wrong right away.
That's okay. It's a difficult one. Happens all the time.
Okay, well, I can relate. Being a Clausewitz, everybody gets that wrong too.
Yeah.
So, I'm very interested, Christina, in your coaching, and it says here that you change behavior with science. And you're a learning experience designer and IO psychologist. Maybe you could explain that, some of your byline there that you have on LinkedIn.
Yes, for sure. Industrial organizational psychology is this branch of psychology that deals with how can we motivate people to, be more productive at work, have higher job satisfaction at work, basically just people science in the workplace. And so when you start to measure some of the things that are happening and understanding people's behaviors and the way that they interact with the environment around them, the people around them, you can start to see certain trends. So when you're trying to change a person's behavior, you use that science to then say, okay, perhaps if someone doesn't really feel like their job has a lot of autonomy to it, maybe if we give them a little more freedom of choice, they might do a better job or be more excited about the work. And so as you apply this more and more, that's just a small example, but it could be even more large scale, like if a leader is better at communicating their vision, people will feel like the company's going somewhere and they'll be more motivated about what they want to do within their work. And so that's why you see, for example, someone who wants to work at Apple or some scrappy startup, even though they seem like two completely different companies, vision can really drive people to do things that takes it to a whole nother level.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I love that. So you work mostly with companies then on consulting the entire employee experience.
hmm So the employee experience has a lot of different pieces to it, from, onboarding to skill development to, in some cases, offboarding or even having alumni programs. Where I fall is more along the internal development of a person. So, as things are changing quickly, how can we get them the skills that they need? And so I focus a lot on changing behavior while someone's in the organization.
But that almost sounds like HR. But you're called in as a consultant to really do an amazing separate job at this outside of what HR departments do. I mean, do you work hand in hand with them sometimes? What's the relation there?
Yes. So HR has really changed a lot from the way that it used to be in the past. It used to be really focused on payroll and benefits administration and wasn't really thought of as someone who deserves a seat at the table. But as things started progressing, where they realized there's a lot of things you can do for how can you recruit certain types of people? How can you improve their productivity so that both they feel better within the company and higher job satisfaction, as well as making the company have positive business outcomes. So when you start to have these conversations, HR started realizing we can have a seat at the table now. So you'll hear they've rebranded in some organizations as people operations. So now, when you need a specialist for learning and development, that's where I come in. Some people do it in house, some people pull in some consultants. And so it does fall within HR or people operations, depending how it's branded in the company.
I see. Okay. So you'll generally come in with a scope of a project. Then it'll be a learning project that you'll be assigned to. And so do you have I guess tools depending on the client, the client company?
Well, generally, what happens is people say, I need a training. And I'm like, well, let's investigate that a little bit. Let's see. Because sometimes it could be a process problem. You can teach somebody everything in the world, but if they don't have specific tools or if the process is really tiring or exhausting, it's not really going to do much if you train them more about how to do something. So, really starting out with, okay, what's the underlying problem here? And what do we actually need to, what, and that's why I like to focus on training, changing behavior rather than on like training or learning. Because if you focus on like learning, it's let me tell you something, now figure out how to do it. Whereas changing behavior is, we need to create this new process based on this behavior that we want. So now, how do I get people to do that?
Okay. Yeah. So it's kind of a lot more analysis of current state, I guess, rather than if you're just an education company, you just come in with your curriculum and that's what you have. But it sounds like you do a lot more analysis up front then.
Yes.
Awesome. Great. So, what are some really, do you have any recent or great examples that you might be able to talk about that um, maybe where you've gone in and made a big difference doing this sort of thing?
Yeah. So I was recently working with a healthcare company, a company within the healthcare field who was looking on making an impact to getting a higher more people to fill the pipeline into difficult to fill positions. So if you take some of these frontline workers who are really motivated, but they may not have come from the background or the means to be able to figure out how to move into, let's say you're a cafeteria worker or a receptionist, you now want to, move into being an imaging tech, or you want to, work within the billing department. There's a track that people have gone on to successfully do this. And so this company created a career development tool to help these people find that track. Except they were having low engagement rates and people weren't finishing the program. So they said, we need a training and we got to improve our training. So rather than just jumping into what do they need to know, I instead asked, what's the goal? What do we want to happen? We want people to create career development plans. So let's work backwards and say, what specific actions does a person need to do in order to create a career development plan? And so the conversation really switches because it's not learn about interviewing, learn about, a resume, learn about this. We were able to say, okay, a person, yes, needs to have a resume, but is that something that you can do within this tool? Yes, they need to do interviewing and job shadowing to figure things out. Is that something we can do in this tool? So from there, we were able to file down the specific actions that a career development plan would have that would actually make a person successful in moving along the steps they need to apply to these jobs. And so they're currently rolling out the program. They're piloting with a few of their clients right now. And so far they've been seeing higher engagement, and we're looking to see how those long-term effects of then getting them into these difficult to fill positions, what that will look like.
Yeah, yeah. I think um, for companies also to realize their the resource that they have in people, and to instead of just constantly relying on rehiring and restaffing to embrace that resource, I think, and really um, build that out for the betterment of people. I don't know. I've seen so many different organizations that that can make all the difference, I think, in the survival long term of the group. Would you kind of agree with that, or have you seen that sort of thing? What's the difference of keeping employees around like that and training them versus turnover?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a big piece of tapping into the motivation, which is one of the most fun parts of being an IO psychologist. Is you think about problems in a very different way. People tend to think, oh, well, that person's lazy. That's not why they're doing it. But really, there's so much more behind what drives our behavior. And when you start to think about that and work around it, you really get these really exciting results.
So when you first go into a company and you first do your analysis, um, what are some of the difficulties that you find commonly these days in companies that with training, and do they have training departments, or are they just underutilized, or what are you seeing a lot of times?
Um, So training doesn't really get a lot of focus in an organization as it's sort of like, oh, that's just another cost center. So it's people are always fighting for resources when it comes to training and demonstrating the value. So that's one of the things that when I come into an organization, immediately I try to partner as quickly as I can with these people to feel like, listen, we're going to do this together. We're going to overcome that obstacle together because they, want to have this seat at the table, like I was talking about before. HR departments want to be able to say, hey, your people is something you should be strategic about. So making sure that I, number one, gain whoever my partner is going to be, that trust, the person who's bringing me in, so that I can make them feel like this project that we're working on together, it's your baby, and I'm going to take really good care of this baby. That's probably like my primary thing. And helping them to then be able to give what the organization is looking for from them so that they can then get resources down the road, because the more success you show at something, the more people are going to want to give you resources to produce more of that success. So I always try to go in with that focus when I start with training in HR departments.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, that's great. Is there a way that you show ROI on the front end? Do you ever show any kind of previous return from previous clients, or what an average is, or how do you show that?
So that's one of the hardest parts when it comes to training is how do you demonstrate an ROI? So it's not going to be very straightforward the way that it is for, something that has like a more tangible aspect to it. So a lot of, completion rates and attendance and engagement, things like that, those are sort of go without saying, and it's what a lot of people rely on. But what I really like to do, going back to, this idea of being a partner and making sure that you're providing value, um, there's this business goal that everyone's trying to reach with whatever problem they're trying to solve. So, if you say, oh, the training team needs to be trained on this new product so that they now use it. Really, what you should be asking is, well, why does the training team or why does the sales team need to use this? Why do they need to know about this? What's going to be different? Well, we want them to post more on the social media page. And so, but why are they doing that? Is it to increase the leads? Are you trying to, what business problem are you trying to solve? And so from there, when they say, oh, we want them to be generating more leads, or, if you want them to be connecting with more unique prospects. Whatever that business problem you're trying to solve is, it needs to be drilled down. And then that's how you're able to say, here's the ROI that I'm giving to you. Because just engagement rates alone, just attendance and satisfaction scores doesn't really make it so that a person wants to now give you more resources in the future to do more training.
Right, right. Yeah. So you kind of that makes a lot of sense. So you kind of set up the metric based on the desired outcome of what the client wants.
And then it really helps to make the learning super focused. Kind of back to that healthcare example, they were like, we got to get them to write resumes, we got to get them to do job shadowing and interviews. And it's, well, within the scope of what we have, resumes can't be done, nor is it going to move the needle in the way you're looking for. So it also helps the scope of training not turn into this giant thing where you're trying to teach them an encyclopedia's worth of information. It's like, here's what they need, let's give them that, here we go.
Hmm. Yeah, 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 and I'm sure that makes big training projects much more manageable that way.
Yes.
What I mean, what is the turnaround for a project typically? How long are your engagements with companies?
It can vary. It could be if it's, something a little quicker. Like one time it was, help master students be able to present business findings better so that, they don't get lost in this academic jargon. Something like that, could be pretty quick, versus, a few weeks maximum, depending on how responsive the client is and how much they want to go through different iterations. And then you have some of your longer term projects, like it could be anything from 6 months to a year. Because another really big aspect of training is rolling out a piece, getting feedback, rolling out a piece, getting feedback to really drive the best results in what you're doing, rather than that waterfall approach of build out this beautiful training program. It looks so gorgeous, doesn't it? Oh my gosh, we have really low engagement. What's going on?
A little piece at a time and go from there.
Yeah. Uh huh.
So, do you work with companies in difficult environments as well? Are there difficult situations that require specific training that you have to get creative on, and the way you're presenting and that sort of thing? Or is it always the same no matter what company you're working with? It's always people.
It varies. So, for instance, when I was at ADP, before I opened up my own consultancy 3 years ago, we were working on an app that was meant to get people to have the ability to report ethics or harassment violations in the workplace. That was probably something that required the most, you know, making sure that, it's a difficult conversation, it's a difficult sell, it's a difficult, thing to get people to want to engage with, because the environment was such. This was during when like Me Too was really big. And right now in companies, if you try to figure out like, hey, was this harassment or is that an ethics violation, you have to write your name, you have to tell everybody, what office you work in, where you are. It's not anonymous in any way. And we were saying sometimes you're not even sure if it's harassment. You just might want to have a conversation without having to stamp your name all over the conversation. So we had to convince HR departments to first pilot the tool with us. And then that took a lot of effort to work through, especially with legal departments, because they don't want to be on the hook for any sort of liability things that might arise. And it's a totally new field. So that was really an interesting. And then when the employees, you roll out this training to them to say, hey, you can use this and report things anonymously, immediate distrust. Like, we don't want to do this. We don't think it's actually going to be anonymous. So it required a lot of trust building. Demonstration is a really great way to build that trust. And partnering with the legal department, with, the HR departments that were wanting to advocate and take this pilot program and try it out. So partnership, trust, demonstration really helped in that situation.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Trust is so important. I think working with people, I think at this point everybody's heard the old people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I hear that a lot from people. I guess it rings true. So, where are you going in the coming year? I mean, you have big plans with a lot of companies, or how's the landscape looking this year?
So, in general, I think one of the places that I've been looking more into is the ChatGPT AI sort of things that are coming out, because there's some really exciting next steps that we're starting to see from that whole sector. So, I've been now looking into the business development side of how can I bring the successes that companies are seeing with AI now into places that may not have normally had it. So, for example, I think it was Deloitte ran a whole productivity exercise where they were able to say, okay, consultants using ChatGPT and consultants not using ChatGPT, what are the effects? And they found like this 60% jump in productivity. And then another company had done it within there, and then they found the same like 60% jump. And there's some caveats and things to be aware of, but that's something that I'm really excited for. And I've been speaking with clients about, okay, so how can we take this? And if you were to, bring on some employees into this enterprise version of ChatGPT, how could you use it? How could you work with it to see those same productivity boosts?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people want to know that now. I mean, companies want to know how they can use that technology. So that is training that you offer then now, or that is something that you've been helping companies with.
Yes, it's still in the early phases. So, back again to that, making sure that you roll small things out at a time and that you're acting as a partner. It's still within those initial testing phases. We're getting new things about ChatGPT every day, but it's something that we're working on to see where, because some of the stuff with AI, people are using it it's sort of like the internet. When the internet first came out, like, wait, what can you even do with this thing? What's Google, what's this? And so by taking it slow and seeing where can we find the best practices, it's making sure that there's innovation as well as practicality.
Hopefully, I feel like people want to jump on before they know everything about what could happen too.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So, with your clients right now that you have, what what challenges are you facing in the education arena as that you see maybe when you're working with actual employees on the training and all? What hurdles do you face on the individual level?
For the employees themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Like what do you see when you're working on these trainings and all? How are people coming across? And
So sometimes there can be skepticism initially because if I'm coming in, it tends to be such that there's not enough resources to go around. And so the training that has been rolled out before has sort of been like, hey, we had to get this out. We did some SME interviews, subject matter expert interviews, and then we kind of put together this training. And sometimes it doesn't always feel the easiest to do because there wasn't enough time for the people in house for whatever reason to really fine tune it and make it an easy experience. So when I come in, it's about getting employees to be able to trust that they'll have this good experience and trust to do the training, because no one's ever like, oh wow, there's another training, I can't wait. It's always like, oh gosh, another training.
right, right, yeah. So I guess once you get them to that point that they see that it's going to be something beneficial, then everything probably gets a little easier.
Yeah, yeah. So getting their trust up front, making sure that, whatever goes out ahead of time or whatever initial strategies to put in are very, very straightforward and easy, to win that trust is probably what I have the most difficulty with at an individual level first.
So where do most of your clients come from? Do you Is it just mostly word of mouth and recommendation that you have, or do you go out looking for companies?
So when I first started building, a few years ago, Upwork was a really great place to be able to understand, okay, where can I get clients, understand what my unique process is that I can provide for people. So starting there, I was able to build a network of clients. But in addition, I also have a pretty strong network because I'm a part of the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychologists, basically a professional organization of other psychologists just like me who do these exact types of things. So I have a pretty strong network within there. And so then that also leads to referrals or working with other people directly after going to like networking events. But then also, anytime you're cruising around LinkedIn, someone says something interesting, you connect with them. Who knows, maybe down the road they say, hey, that post you put up, I'd love to work with you. So
I'm also kind of curious about the different kinds of companies you might work with. Um, is it just all different? Like anybody who needs training, any company that needs training? I mean, that sounds like could be any company.
yes, it could be, but I don't work with every company. So, I mean, that would be awesome, but also really time consuming because I like to have some level of specialization in what I do so that I can make sure I'm giving the best solution possible. So I've done a lot of work with, I find that the place that I work best within is either there's like a forward thinking aspect in some kind of way. They're not just looking for a straight lecture training or something where, especially this mentality of like, they should figure it out. My mentality is if you create a really good user experience for somebody, they're going to keep coming back to you. So if you don't want to put the time and effort to do that, then we're not going to work well together because I'm constantly going to be saying, like, well, what would the learner think? What would the learner feel? Why would the learner want to do that? Um, so that user centered, forward thinking type of company. Um, and then usually when they're sort of like a mid-sized company as well, they're nimble enough to be able to implement some of the newer practices, but at the same time, they're old enough to have the resources to do it. So startups, while I've certainly helped startups in the past, sometimes they don't have the time or resources to devote to creating learning programs, and they might be better suited for something that's a little bit more off the shelf. Larger companies, I've also been able to help and navigated through from my time at ADP, but at the same time, they tend to sometimes take a long time to move things forward. So I find that my way of working and the forward thinking that I'd like to achieve within the projects tends to lend well to that medium sized company.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I I would imagine the larger companies you have to come up with more of a proposal and write out a lot more stuff about what's going to happen. And does it get more complicated when you have more people involved? I imagine.
Well, see, that's usually what it is. It's around, there's so much bureaucracy that it tends to take longer. Then you have to, there's more caveats to it. There's a little more of needing to really, like you said, just spell everything out to such an extent that it doesn't really leave room for as much creativity anymore. So while I can certainly do it, and I've done it in the past, if it is a larger company of that, like an enterprise size company, if they don't have some flexibility or if they don't have like a green light to be able to try out something that hasn't been done for the past 20 years because things are constantly changing and learning practices tend to change, but larger companies don't like the look of it sometimes. So, telling someone that you can't just put out a lecture and then call it a day can be a difficult conversation sometimes.
Right. Yeah. So you get sometimes you get in the position where you have to just tough it out and give long, boring lectures, and that's all the client wants.
I mean, so what winds up happening is in those situations, I have had to, especially early in your career when you're not really quite established yet, you're still figuring out your flow. As I mentioned, when I first started, I was working on Upwork, and so when you have to take certain projects, no matter what, I always try to figure out a way to incorporate that user experience into it. So even if they say like you have to make a 20 slide PowerPoint or an hour long e-learning or create a PowerPoint for me to like lecture someone for an hour workshop. I always try to incorporate some level of practice or activity, reflection, experimentation, so that it's not so much them just talking. It's okay, try this out. Even if it's the person lecturing, but they're giving them an exercise to try as they're lecturing. So, for example, a topic that tends to come up is how do I deal with stress? What am I supposed to do? And so, if someone's insisting on lecturing and doesn't really want to practice, one thing that they can do is say, if you take a minute right now and you look forward and just sort of stare out of your peripherals, because you're not narrowed in on a certain focus, if you focus on your peripherals, it helps to tell your body, use your body to control your body. Don't be stressed. We're looking at a large view of something, so that must mean that we're relaxed and under control. Versus when, you're just saying like, hey, if you're stressed, try to look at your peripherals and move on to the next thing. So, and in both cases, I'm lecturing you, but in one, I'm giving you an activity to do. And in the other, I'm just sort of moving on to the next thing. So, all that to say, no matter what, I'm always incorporating some type of experimentation or exercise for the learner.
Wow, that's a great tip. I love that. I might have to remember that and try to steal that.
No
My
problem.
own
Feel
stuff.
free. Yeah.
So are there any other tips you can think of like that that take into consideration the user experience when you're like if you're just giving a talk or um, are you always thinking in terms of the observer instead of yourself?
Always. The always start off with, what do I want these people to do? Why do I want them to do it? So it all comes back again to that business goal. You want these people in a room, you want them to be doing something. Well, what is that you want them to be doing? And then provide them the information and hopefully the moments of experimentation to master that behavior that you're expecting of them, so that when they leave the room, they say, oh gosh, I should go try this or I should go do that. And now you've successfully changed their behavior towards the goal of what works for them and what works for you.
Right, right. Yeah, I hear about the power of intention sometimes, and uh, that keeps coming back around to me. I keep thinking about the power of intention, and it's very important. I think what outcome you want to have from pretty much every conversation that you have with people, you can either have intention or not, and I think it makes a huge difference.
I stole Kathy Moore is this really prominent learning designer. She's got this great sentence frame that I love to use. It's a measure that we already use. You put in that measure, will change X% in X amount of months, um, as people of a group, so whatever that audience is, does something, whatever that something is. So it's a really helpful sentence frame because it forces you to figure out what's the measurement that we're going to use, how much is it going to change, how long is it going to take to change, who are we changing, and then lastly, what are we trying to get them to do?
So you can use that in anything, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
What else would you like to? Is there anything else you want to talk about in your coaching that you would want a prospective client to hear about or know about?
Yeah, I'd say the role of a person within work is only becoming more prominent, and it's happening a lot more. So, considering that person and designing around them will make them want to come to you more. So, we're seeing a lot more automation. We're seeing, like with ChatGPT coming out and Bard and, all these tools that make things happen less. So many people are worried about, oh my gosh, well, is that going to automate me out of the job? Are we even going to interact with people anymore? What does that mean for the human interaction? Well, it's actually only going to just crank it up a notch. And so these human person to person interactions are actually going to be much richer and happening a lot more. You're going to need to be able to say, okay, if we can get XYZ thing done, who do I need to connect with? Who do I need to convince to come with me? So when it comes to those soft skills, really focusing on what is it that a person needs and then building around that your strategy, whatever you're going to do next, I think is really important and should really be considered all the time. So even, I mean, whether it's your kid at home or, even I just started doing training with my boyfriend's dog so that we could get him to do some more cool tricks and everything. It's always about the what's in it for me, what's in it for me. And so that also applies even within a company when you're interacting with anybody. People are people. So making sure that you're making that user centered decision, that what's in it for me, for them, so that you can generate more of that, people returning to you for getting more of that success that you're giving them. Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn, Krystina Moustakis. And then I also have my website, KrystinaM.com. And Krystina is Krystina, and Moustakis is Moustakis. It's very Greek long name.
Perfect, perfect. We'll make sure we get it spelled out here too when we post this recording here. Well, I really want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me um, today. It's been a pleasure.
Yes. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure chatting with you as well.
Great, great. We'll have to catch up again sometime soon, I hope.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.
Okay. Have a great day, Christina. Thank you.
Bye.